Also, a warm welcome to all of you who found time to listen to our presentation. We are both, Jose and me, happy that we can present also part of our work from InfoRange. So now, next anomaly. Okay. Rangelands cover about 40% of the land area on the African continent, and they are characterized, as you know, by low rainfall because they are in the semi-arid and arid areas, sparse vegetation, low primary productivity. There is no crop production on a regular basis. Maybe there is some crop production in some single places, but then also only opportunistically. Therefore, the population density is low, and then the areas are marginalized, which also means that there is poor infrastructure in the area. So with these characteristics, policymakers or also other external actors might have the impression that these are just vast empty areas of no much use, hence in other words, wastelands. So following this narrative, also decision makers have in various rangeland areas then decided to dump civilization's waste into those areas. And unfortunately, this has also happened in Marsabit County, where they dumped toxic waste in one location. Now, on the other hand, we know rangelands is the asset base for pastoral production. And now, since about 20 years, actually, the importance of pastoral livestock production has also been widely recognized. This is also so because finally the economic contribution has been calculated and determined, so that we now know how much they contribute to the agricultural GDPs of the countries. And this is, for instance, in the Horn of Africa, in all these countries, more than 30%. In Kenya, it's about 45%. So when we are characterizing rangelands with sparse vegetation, low primary productivity, we are actually not representing the value that rangelands play for pastoral livestock keepers. And that means we actually need to use a different view. We need to use the relational view instead of a substantive view on resources, also when we want to evaluate them. And this relational view means the use of the resource determines whether an object is a resource and also its resource value. And I shortly want to explain this based on this picture. So here on the picture you see a grazing area from northern Kenya, a pasture area. Now you might say, oops, a pasture area. What I see here is bare soil, a lot of stones, and these miserable looking acacia shrubs. Yeah, but then when you look at the livestock, and particularly if you are a livestock person, then you see, wow, the livestock is actually in good condition. These sheep and goat, they have shiny furs, no bones can be seen, the stomach are nicely filled, and the fat ramp here has also nice fat at the bottom of the animal. So somehow this is a contradiction. How can this be? Yeah, the reason is that we, or people with the outside eyes, are not recognizing the particular feature of the area that make them a pasture resource. And this feature indeed, let me tell you, so also we had to find this out, is the presence of these small stones. So not the bigger stones, these pebbles, these small stones, and they actually act like an insulation so that the moisture stays in the soil. We have these gardens here, these gravel gardens, it's the same principle. So between those small stones, there are actually nutritious herbs growing, and these herbs are the fodder base that makes the sheep and goat fed in that area. That's what a relational view means. Those fodder resources are indeed a good resource for these animals. they would not be a good resource for the so-called improved breeds, yeah, like milk or meat breeds from sheep and goats, because they have a body weight that is 2 or 3 times higher, so they cannot cover their maintenance and performance requirements based on this. And for sure, they would not be a resource for cattle in the area. So the livestock environment interactions matter when we have to determine the value of a grazing resource. With this knowledge, or this type of knowledge, is what renders the rangeland area into a valuable resource for pastoralists. They depend on the fact that the grazing resources are heterogeneous and very variable, because only this permits them to have fodder for their animals throughout the year. So they need knowledge on the different locations that they can plan to go to a particular area at a particular time when their fodder is available there. Hence, the whole system is a knowledge and information intensive system. In InfoRange now, we are understanding the knowledge of pastoral people, or this is our aim. We aim to understand the knowledge that underlies their rangeland governance and also management. But then we are also supporting the exchange of this knowledge with other actors, and we also work on the topic of improving the information access to pastoralists themselves. I will talk more about that in a minute. Now, I want to give you a small insight in our work. I have said these vast rangelands, they are a resource to the pastoralist only because they possess the knowledge. Now, when we want to find out about this knowledge, it is good to see how are actually the people orientating themselves into the landscape. So how are they mapping the place? And indeed, pastoralists have for all the single locations names, and those names are known to everyone. They are not found on any map, unless now one is doing a participatory mapping with them where those features can be shown. So this, and they need, of course, to know these places and the names and where they are, because when they are sending a herder somewhere, or when they want to talk about an issue that happened in a particular grazing units, they need to know where it is. Yeah, and they have actually no much problem to identify the areas and also the borders of them based on the features that are shown in a satellite map. So 2 of our PhD students, Malit Wako and Haron Alcala, they have been doing mapping with the pastoralist, and here you see the outcome of it in the northern part of the Marsabit County. So all these are different grazing units that they are differentiating. And they are differentiating them because they have different properties. And I want to give you an example on that you can see more exactly what they actually take into account. And there I refer now to this blue square. So here, for instance, we have one area that is called Badan Nyenja. Nyenja means actually lion. In this area, we find grasses of the Digitaria species. These are finger grasses, and they are actually a very good source of fodder, particularly in the wet season, and animals will immediately improve their conditions when they are feeding on them. Then we have a different area here, Valenzo Cachara. This area is a drought reserve. It has, apart from grasses, also legumes, and it is very closely located near the settlement and also water sources, so that it has a high potential. So it is really used during end of dry seasons or droughts. Yeah, and then we have here the area Cuerquero, which is an area which is mostly used by camels. There are a number of common tree species there that are used as fodder for camels, and which is then also why it's not so much used by other areas, by other animals. Yeah, with this this type of knowledge, so these soil conditions, vegetation composition, presence of vectors. This is common knowledge among pastoralists, and they are also teaching their children about it when they are going to learn how to do herding. But now when it comes to taking the decision of which area to choose to move the herd to next, then they need additional information, so up-to-date information. And this is, they need to know about the actual amount of fodder to be found in the area. And what they find out there depends actually on the season. So in a dry season, they need to know in which area there is still a reserve of dried fodder. In the wet season, they have to know when has it rained in that area, how long is it ago, and how, because the different vegetation types grow days or weeks after the last rain. They have also to know about the use frequency in that area. So when has it been used last? And this one can see, for instance, at the presence of animal droppings and also their stage of degradation. And the current grazing intensity. So those are informations they need to know. They need also to know where there is at the moment a water source that is not a permanent water source in the area. Maybe the dam is full. They have to know about the security of the area, but also the security of the well that is reachable from that area. In order to find out such information, they have different sources, but finally they always need to go and scout. They need to go and check the situation in the particular area before they can move with their herd. And this is now where we want to come in and improve information access. So for instance, we want to provide, we are developing an application, and in this application we also want to provide rainfall data, so remotely sensed rainfall distributions that show them over the whole area. We want to show livestock distributions, but also fodder availability. And we do this by combining remotely sensed data with data generated by the pastoralists themselves. And these are mainly photos. And already nowadays, with the increased use of smartphones in the area, pastoralists are sometimes taking photos when they go scouting in order to show them to their relatives, to show the condition, how it is in the place. And here I have some examples from such photos for you. These have been taken by herders in a project that has been conducted by Hussein in South Ethiopia. So here you see a pasture in the beginning of the wet season where the cows are grazing on annual and perennial grasses. Or in the dry season here, they are grazing in a dry season grazing reserve on a lot of hay on the stalk. Or later on in a dry season, cattle might go to an area where there is a lot of leaf litter from bushes, which is usually rich in protein. Particularly those two last pictures show fodder that is not green. And this is, so to say, a problem to us or to those who want to know where people are go and graze, because we are not used to the fact that animals are feeding on fodder, or grazing animals are feeding on fodder that are not green. And also the remotely sensed data that are usually used, like the NDVI data, are not showing these places, of course. In order now to use those different grazing units, pastoral herds are mobile, and I just want to give you some examples on the degree of this mobility. So here, that's also from Marsabit County. The black dots you see are water points, and the green shades indicate distance to the water point, 10 and then 20 kilometer distance. Now, when we look at the movement of camel herds, we see that the camels are actually going grazing in areas which are far away from the water points. They are the only species that are able to do this to this extent, so they are also alone in those areas. They are the only users then in those particular areas. These data have been collected retrospectively using grazing calendars And there the pastoralist has indicated the names of these grazing units so that one knows where they have been going. Now in InfoRange, in the app, we also want to include a component where the tracking of the herds is possible using the mobile phones. Such GPS tracking we have piloted in various projects, and here I want to show you an example from goat herds. So on the picture here you see on the left the itinerary for a whole day. The different colors are actually showing the different hours. So one can see during some hours they have been walking faster, and in other hours they have been resting on a particular place. On the itinerary for the 7 days, you see where they have been using pasture area and also when they went to the watering place. And what I find quite interesting is that one can nicely get the distance, and actually the daily distance is between 15 and 20 kilometers. And in a month, the goat herd is actually covering, and the herder, 400 kilometers. So this way, so this knowledge on the pasture resources and also the information they obtain in order to take the right decision, and then the mobility, all this is the basis for the production in pastoral system, and it also leads to resilience of the system. So particularly those features that allow to exploit this heterogeneity and variability are the ones that make the system resilient. And they have several. We know the area is also really characterized by uncertainty, so they need to have several, but I just want to point out some few that can all be grouped under making use of diversity. So pastoralists keep different species in Kenya, particularly camels, cattle, sheep and goat. They have different fodder requirements and also different functions. They keep local breeds that produce under these conditions, and within the local breed they are differentiating again different types that are more adapted to drier conditions, they still produce, and others that are, when the condition is better, actually produce more. Then this is also not a specialized livestock production system, but the animals have diverse functions depending on which age and sex class they are in. And in the communities, they have established exchange roles between species and age and sex classes. So for instance, they can exchange one castrate against a heifer in cattle, or they can buy a camel calf by paying 12 goats, young goats. Yeah? So with these exchanges, they can act against chance effects also. So with these mechanisms, they increase their options and add flexibility, very important to be able to deal with uncertainty. The redundancy creates buffers. And all these measures show here also that the variability in range resources is actually utilized by diversity in livestock resources. Yeah, and in order now to be able to do this, so to use this principle, the access or the secured access to land is essential for pastoral production. And not just land, but large stretches of uninterrupted land with the particular units that they can use during the different seasons of the year. And with this, I'm giving now the word to Hussein.
Well, thank you, Brigitte. To pick it up now from where you have paused, I would like to point out also that another element around promoting resilience in the rangelands was thought to be by securing tenure rights through formal registration of communal land ownership. For pastoralist communities, of course, land ownership is somewhat an alien concept because the land is a communal resource, and rather than ownership, the emphasis is mainly on user rights that are endowed collectively for territories that are associated with groupings such as clans, families, and ethnic communities. And these user rights involve the practice of negotiated and reciprocal rights of access to resources, particularly pasture and water. And also the user rights can overlap, which means, for example, within a given land, it can include other land uses like crop farming, conservation areas, public spaces, for example, for settlements. And in countries, for example, such as Kenya, land laws that govern the land were mainly based on European views of property rights that centered on demarcation of land borders and exclusive rights to the owner. So while using these laws then, communal rights remained largely informal, unregistered, and also insecure, which resulted in rampant loss of land to other competing land uses that made the pastoralist communities vulnerable to various elements. Next slide, please. And in the recent past, also we could see that a number of countries, including Kenya, have tried to develop legal frameworks that can lead to recognition and registration of communal tenure rights. And the central aim here is, because the central assumption is when tenure rights are secured, this will protect the land, it will improve management, and makes communities to be more resilient. And in Kenya, again, the example that we have is this law that is called Community Land Act, which was enacted in 2016. And this followed changes within the Kenya's constitution that gave birth to this law. This law has been in existence for the last 7 years, but implementation rate of it is quite low, with only a few communities managing to register their land so far. And one stated reason for this is lack of resource allocation, and this is from limited political will within the governance cycles or levels that we have in the country. And on the other hand, questions have also been raised by communities, on practicality of this particular law in protecting their rights, and also in terms of its compatibility with already existing user rights that we've just mentioned, and also the governance institutions that have been in place for generations. It was also feared that by registering the land, it can make the borders that have been fluid to be rigid once the land is actually formally demarcated and registered. And already these questions around the borders has come up while implementation of this law is being discussed among the communities, further leading to delay. But as this conversation goes on about land registration, other changes are happening. And particularly one significant shift I would like to mention is change, in view of the land. Brigitte already mentioned that the view of the land is that of wasteland that have no much use. But this element, around thinking that this land is of low potential and with limited interest for other uses has changed. And this is because it has become now a frontier, sort of rich in resources. And this is as other economic uses, such as extractives and energy resources gets discovered. And due to this interest, the region has also been opened up in terms of improvement in infrastructure and communication technologies. And some of these investments and also infrastructure in itself require large land that be acquired. And once acquired, these lands are often removed from pastoral use. And this happens with limited regard for the current use. And it's also based on what Brigitte mentioned already, that the value of the land is viewed differently by the authorities. And one of the major investments that I also want to mention as an example that you can see also in this picture is green energy development, particularly through wind and solar power investments. And this follows the global rush, for clean energy to avert the climatic catastrophe that we all face. And Kenya actually wants to be completely on green energy by 2030. And this push, however, the requirement for energy is legitimate, is seen to negatively impact, pastoralist communities' access to land. And for instance, our county, the way I see it, Marsabit County, hosts the largest wind farm in Africa. And that is what you see in that picture. It's called Lake Turkana Wind Power. And the project has been contentious from the word go. It acquired a land up to 150,000 acres, and the acquisition did not follow due process, and particularly, community consultations did not take place, and benefit sharing also was not as expected. So because of this, there has been contestation. So the community went to court, and after several years, actually, the acquisition of this land was declared illegal, and the title that was issued to the investors was said to be null and void. However, because, as you can see also from this picture, the wind power by that time already was complete, the energy was flowing, the profits are flowing, and it continues as the community figures out how that court ruling can take effect. And as we speak, indeed, the government and investors have moved to another level because this area is highly endowed with these resources. Projects which are triple the size of the current one is already in plan and at different levels of approvals. So this causes threats. If you can give me the next slide, Brigitte. This causes threat now to pastoralist communities. And it's important to note that these investments, suppose they have immense potentials, in terms of economic potentials that can change the fortune of the region and the communities. But the mode of its implementation is what is making it to be counterproductive. Often, as also mentioned by Brigitte, this acquisition ignores globally advocated principles. For example, communities have to have free prior informed consent, for various development that happens within their areas, and they need to participate, in various issues that affect their lives and livelihoods. But the governments and the investors are yet to fully recognize these common property rights, or even though, as I've mentioned before, there are laws in place that are supposed to protect these rights. And when implemented now with this limited regard for tenure and land use rights of the local communities, these projects end up blocking livestock access, fragments the grazing areas, and hinder herd mobility. Even with the current advancement in laws, governments in these current now projects, they disregard and dispossess communities of land. And this reduces, the community welfare and also the resilience that to climate change, and it can make them even more vulnerable. And that is in the first place what these investments in, for example, wind power was supposed to achieve. Next slide, Brigitte. So with these contested values now, the disregard for communal tenure rights emanates from the persistence, of recognition of the values of land as seen by the communities, these rich values that was just explained by Brigitte. So thus compensation, for instance, are based on other frameworks, like some frameworks that are left behind by the colonialists. Indeed, land in Kenya, for instance, it's valued based on, does this land have a title? Is there any physical infrastructure that has been put on this land? Is there a crop that has been cultivated in this land? And once it doesn't have that, then it's seen to be open for appropriation. And it also follows, underestimation of the value of pastoralism in the drylands, which also persists, although some level of recognition could be seen. And in some instances, even the practice, the mobility that Brigitte just explained is also viewed as environmentally destructive in some quarters. So it is important, therefore, to observe that pastoral production system is guided by this detailed intergenerational knowledge, and has been explained by Brigitte. They have these intricate values, for their range, and that relates to livestock production and also culture, actually other socio-cultural values as well, which needs to be understood and appreciated for meaningful resilience planning. For instance, the basics of rangeland qualities as understood by the pastoralist and utilized in livestock production need to be brought to fore. Also, other land values such as cultural connections are important. And therefore, this our Inforange project has also been mentioned. Through its various activities, then it wants to bring out this community perspective of the rangeland resources, the governance and the management system that are used. It further also enhances dialogue between different governance levels, such as the county and the national levels, in order to raise the understanding and stimulate joint planning of the use of rangeland resources. And that way then, this resilience building can be achieved. So with that, we say thank you very much for your attention. And of course, we thank the various stakeholders, the donors that supported this work to be possible, and our colleagues also that contributed to this work. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.